There was a 14-year-old boy named Daniel. He lived with his parents and his younger sister in a peaceful town called Greenhill. The town was small, clean, and surrounded by green trees. Everyone knew one another, and life was usually quiet. Daniel was a cheerful boy. He loved playing football with his friends after school, riding his bicycle around the neighborhood, and reading adventure books before going to bed. His teachers liked him because he was polite and hardworking. However, Daniel had one habit that often disappointed his parents. Whenever something went wrong, he always expected someone else to fix it. If his room was untidy, he waited for his mother to remind him to clean it. If the trash bin outside was full, he walked past it believing someone else would empty it. If he saw litter on the ground at school, he ignored because he thought it was the cleaner's job. His father noticed this many times but never became angry. Instead, he would simply smile and say, "A good person does not wait for others to do what is right." Daniel always nodded, but he never thought much about those words. Every weekday, Daniel walked to school along Oak Street. It was the busiest road in Greenhill. Shop owners opened their stores there every morning. Children walked to school with their parents. Workers hurried to their offices, and buses passed by every few minutes. Daniel enjoyed walking along Oak Street because there was always something interesting to see. One Monday morning, as he turned the corner, he suddenly stopped. A huge stone was lying in the middle of the road. It was large enough to force everyone to walk around it. Some people stepped into the muddy roadside to avoid it. Others crossed to the opposite side of the street. Nobody seemed happy. Yet nobody did anything. One after the other, people walked around the stone. An office worker looked at it, shook his head, and continued on his way. Two boys laughed and jumped over it as if it were part of a game. An elderly man walked slowly with his walking stick. As he tried to avoid the stone, he lost his balance for a moment. Luckily, a young woman nearby caught his arm before he fell. Everyone saw what happened. Everyone continued walking. Daniel stood there for a few seconds before walking to school. As he entered his classroom, he forgot about the stone. But when school ended that afternoon, it was still there. Nothing had changed. The next morning, the stone was still blocking the road. This time, Daniel noticed something he had missed the previous day. People were not only avoiding the stone, they were complaining about it. Some blamed the town council. Some blamed the careless drivers. Others blamed the people who lived nearby. Everyone seemed to have someone to blame. Daniel quietly walked past them. Without realizing it, he had become just like everyone else. That evening, while helping his father water the flowers in their small garden, Daniel mentioned the stone. "It's still there," he said. "I don't understand why nobody has removed it." His father continued watering the flowers for a moment before turning off the hose. Then he asked gently, "What did you do when you saw it?" Daniel looked down. "I walked around it." His father smiled, not because Daniel had given the right answer, but because he knew his son had begun to think. "Sometimes," he said, "the easiest thing is to complain. The harder thing is to ask yourself, what can I do?" Daniel did not reply. That night, as he lay in bed, those words stayed in his mind. For the first time, he wondered if the stone was more than just a stone. Maybe it was a test that everyone including him had failed. Daniel slept poorly that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw people walking around the stone instead of moving it. He remembered the old man who had almost fallen and the mother who had struggled to push her baby's stroller through the muddy roadside. The stone had become more than an obstacle in the road. It had become a problem everyone noticed but nobody wanted to solve. The following morning, Daniel left home a little earlier than usual. The cool breeze made the streets quieter, and only a few people were already on their way to work. As he approached Oak Street, he saw the stone exactly where it had been for the past 2 days. A bakery owner carefully carried a tray of fresh bread around it. Moments later, a delivery driver stopped his van, complained about the blocked road, and drove away without another thought. Before long, the street became busy again. People looked at the stone, sighed, complained, and continued with their day as though they had accepted that it would remain there forever. Daniel stood quietly on the side of the road, watching everything. For the first time, he noticed that stone itself wasn't the biggest problem. The real problem was that everyone believed it was somebody else's responsibility. He remembered his father's words from the previous evening. The harder thing is to ask yourself, what can I do? Those words stayed with him throughout the school day. Even during maths and science lessons, his mind kept returning to the stone. By the time the final bell rang, he had already made a decision. Instead of heading straight home, Daniel placed his school bag on his back and walked towards Oak Street once again. He stopped in front of the stone and examined it carefully. It was larger than he imagined, and there was no guarantee that he would be able to move it. Still, he knew that if he walked away like everyone else, nothing would ever change. He took a deep breath, placed both hands firmly against the rough surface of the stone and pushed with all strength he had. The stone refused to move. Daniel stepped back, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and tried again. This time he bent his knees, planted his feet firmly on the ground, and pushed with even greater determination. Slowly, almost without him noticing, the stone shifted a few inches. That tiny movement filled him with hope. Maybe it can be moved after all, he thought. Daniel refused to give up. He rested for a few seconds, took another deep breath, pushed again with all his strength. The stone moved a little farther. Although his arms were beginning to ache, he could feel that it was no longer firmly stuck in the ground. As he struggled with the heavy stone, a few people walking by slowed down to watch him. Some smiled and continued on their way. Others shook their heads, convinced that he was wasting his time. A middle-aged man even laughed quietly before saying, "That stone is too heavy for one boy." Daniel heard the comment, but he did not answer. He tightened his grip and pushed once more. Little by little, the stone rolled towards the side of the road. The sound of the stone scraping against the ground caught the attention of more people. Within a few minutes, a small crowd had gathered nearby. They stood in silence, watching a 14-year-old boy do the job that hundreds of adults had ignored for 3 days. An elderly man who had struggled to walk past the stone the previous day slowly stepped forward. "I think he needs some help," he said. Without waiting for anyone's permission, the old man placed both hands on the stone. A young woman joined him. Then another man. Soon, 6 people were pushing together. With one final effort, the heavy stone rolled completely off the road and came to rest beside a large tree. For a moment, nobody spoke. The road, which had been blocked for days, was finally clear again. Cars passed without slowing down. Cyclists rode safely through the street. Children laughed as they walked to school without stepping into the mud. Daniel looked at the people around him and smiled. He realized something surprising. The stone had not been impossible to move. It had only been waiting for someone to make the first move. Just as Daniel was about to pick up his school bag and leave, the owner of the bakery across the street walked towards him. The man had been watching everything from the doorway of his shop. He smiled warmly and said, "Young man, I've seen many people complain about that stone. Today, you reminded this whole street that change begins with one person." He reached into his pocket, took out a small folded note, and handed it to Daniel. "Read this when you get home," he said with a smile. Daniel thanked the baker, placed the folded note carefully inside his school bag, and continued walking home. He wanted to read it immediately, but something told him to wait until he was alone. When he reached home, his mother noticed the dirt on his clothes and the dust on his shoes. "What happened to you?" she asked with a smile. Daniel washed his hands before answering. "There was a big stone in the middle of Oak Street. I tried to move it." His younger sister looked at him with wide eyes. "By yourself?" Daniel laughed softly. "At first, yes. Later, other people came to help." His father, who had been reading a newspaper in the living room, looked up. He did not say anything, but there was a quiet smile on his face. After dinner, Daniel went to his room. He took the folded note from his school bag and carefully opened it. Inside, only a few lines were written. "Dear young man, for 3 days, I watched hundreds of people walk past that stone. Some complained. Some blamed others. Some pretended not to see it. Today, you reminded everyone that problems do not disappear because we talk about them. You did more than move a stone. You encouraged others to believe that one person can make a difference. Never lose that spirit. The world will always need people who solve problems instead of waiting for someone else to do it." Daniel read the note several times before carefully placing it inside one of his favorite books. He knew he wanted to keep it for a long time. The days passed, and life in Greenhill returned to normal. The stone was gone, but the story remained. People who had witnessed what happened often talked about the boy who had refused to walk away. Something else changed as well. Whenever Daniel saw a problem, he no longer asked himself, "Whose job is this?" Instead, he asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" He discovered that not every problem could be solved by one person. However, every solution had to begin with one person who was willing to take the first